My name's Mel Ainscough. I'm speaking to you from the city of Manchester here in the United Kingdom, and I have two partners who've been organising this. Anton, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Anton Floric from the Staff College, and we're hosting this initiative.
And where are you
Uh,
speaking to, Anton? Where are you?
North Wales.
North Wales, yeah. Richard?
Hi all. Great to have you all with us. My name's Richard Ingram. I'm working as a consultant with UNESCO, and I'm coming to you from Bern, Switzerland.
Okay. Well, let me give you a kind of background introduction before we start talking about Chile as such. This is the second of this series of conversations. And I keep wanting to keep mentioning the word conversation because that's what we're trying to create here. It's not a workshop or a conference. It's not experts telling you what to do. This is a conversation where we share experiences and ideas from different parts of the world. This is the second meeting. The first meeting was focused on Australia, and we had a very nice discussion about all that, a very challenging discussion. And there is some material that you can look at and listen to, which we'll tell you about towards the end of this meeting as we try to draw things together. Just briefly, then, the background. We've called this series of conversations Every Learner Matters. The origins of the phrase Every Learner Matters are drawn from a UNESCO guide that was published in 2017. It's a guide for ensuring inclusion and equity in education. And it was developed by a group of international experts. It's available free in a number of languages, including Spanish, on the UNESCO website. And it's a framework for reviewing education systems. And the group that designed that guide, in the discussion, this phrase came up. And we decided to call it the sort of motto or the principle from which we were developing that guide. And the full principle is every learner matters and matters equally. And that really is what we're here to talk about. By looking at the situation in countries around the world, we want to learn from one another about how do we develop education systems where every learner matters and matters equally. Today we'll focus on Chile, which is a fascinating case. As to be honest, all cases, all countries are interesting. Chile has had a lot of attention over recent years in the Latin American region on the sort of measures of school success that are used internationally. Chile is usually seen as being the most successful. But as we will hear in our conversation, it's also a very complicated one to do with the history and politics, as with all country. And it's particularly a country where education policy has been driven by kind of market forces. The idea that by markets, by competition and choice, you will raise the overall standard of the education system. That's the aspiration, but of course, as everywhere in the world, the realities are rather different. And as we're going to hear, it's quite a complicated education system. As I understand it, and of course I just occasionally visit Chile, there are broadly three kinds of school. There are sort of municipal schools, the schools run by the local, what we would call a local authority here in the UK. The last information I could get was about 34% of schools are those. Then there's something that's called subsidized private schools, which I take to be a bit like charter schools in the United States or academies here in England. These are public schools, but they're run as semi-private organisations, and parents have to pay a certain amount of it. And then there's a smaller percentage of schools which are private, about 10% are private, and of course those are fee payings. So in understanding the system, we need to understand the complexity of that. And of course, we're interested in it. What does it do, particularly for the most vulnerable children and young people? What does that open the doors? We've defined three very broad questions for our discussion. We don't want these questions to limit what we're doing, but broadly, this is what we're interested in. Richard, have you got those in front of you? Your sound's off.
Yeah, sorry. I said good question. I'm just going to bring them up right now
Oh, sorry,
because
I
I
think I'm
couldn't. I've got 99% sure I know them off the top of my head, but I don't want to get them wrong.
Yeah, these questions we pose as a broad agenda, but we don't want to go through and address them one by one. But broadly, this is in talking about every child matters or every learner matters. These are the questions that we are wanting to reflect on.
So Mel, I've put them into the chat here, but I'll just read them out as well while we're here. So
Yeah.
is the education system being considered such like today we're considering Chile's education system, is it adequately preparing all learners to thrive in a complex and changing world? Now this is an interesting first one because we're framing inclusive education here about we're focusing on all learners. Every learner matters, obviously, is the name of the program and the conversation. So this is are the education systems is the kind of the purpose and the goal and the structure of education, is that serving everyone in the country or young people? Secondly, how far are existing educational policies fostering inclusion and equity in education? Thirdly, to what extent are these policies working for all children and young people? Again, that brings us back to all children and young people, not just those that are marginalized. Of course, it does include marginalized students. And if they're not working, what are the barriers and how might these be addressed? So like, as Mel says, these aren't, set questions that we're expecting set answers to. They're just a sort of a structure to build this conversation around. And it's
So,
something and it gives an indication
so
of the framing, I think.
yeah, thank you. So to get us thinking and talking, we've been fortunate to invite two friends who are Chilean colleagues, and we're going to ask them to give us a sort of a quick introduction. Stressing they've not been asked to give a lecture. They're not going to use slides. It's as if we're meeting over a cup of coffee and we say to them, "What's it like in the Chilean education system?" So we've got two colleagues. We've got Romina Madrid Miranda, should know that, who is a Chilean colleague, but she actually works at the University of Stirling in Scotland. And we've got Carmen Montechinas, who works at the Catholic University in Valparaiso. And they're just going to sort of set the scene for us. So I think, Romina, you're going to start.
Yes, I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, very clear.
Perfect. It is a pleasure to be part of these conversations, these global conversations about inclusion, and I'm delighted to be here with Carmen, and thank you, Mel and Anton and Richard for the invitation. Chile is a unique case for many reasons. Thinking about the education system, it is quite a unique case because in a way there are contradictions and the dilemmas and the tensions, as you well were describing, Mel. Chile has a three-track system that combines public or municipal schools with schools that are supported by the government as well, but also by families. This sector of the education system has grown in the last 20, 30 years, and has the majority of students, 55%. And we also have a very kind of relatively small and very constant private fee paying system, which is about 10%. One of the things that you didn't say, Mel, that I think is really important when we think about Chile is the important levels of segregation that we have in Chile. Chile remains one of the most socioeconomically segregated system in the world. Particularly, in the different kind of measures, and that I think is a feature that is quite important to understand and to unpack a little bit more when we think about inclusion, when we think about all, is education serving all? In recent data evidence, we have a study from 2024 that is saying, I mean, it kind of is the first study that is showing us really after 20 years that segregation in fourth grade has fallen into the lowest level in 20 years, which is a major data to consider, and 20, closer to 27% in 10th grade. And this is something that Carmen will expand a little bit more, but it is a response to some of the intentional inclusion policies that we have had. So we see that these policies have impact, and this very raw data is showing the impact in segregation, but still very, very important challenges as we have important gaps between public and private regarding access to the university, And also, although in the region we have a very good coverage in terms of the percentage of students who attend to school in primary and secondary, we still are lower in early childhood education. We still in terms of the OECD countries. And something that calls our attention with Carmen also was this. It seems that the challenges are becoming more and more important after the pandemic. After the pandemic in Chile, and the schools were closed. I mean, I don't know the specific data, but schools were closed for quite an important period of time in comparison with the region and the global. I mean, I'm living in Scotland, so it was much more than other systems, and we are seeing like an important and concerning information, data about the dropout percentage after the pandemic. So we are dealing with really important questions about even engaging in the participation of students, in the link between students and community, because when you have these levels of dropout, there are important questions about the value of education for families, the relationship between families and communities around education, etc. So Carmen, this is kind of a little bit like a the system, and hopefully Carmen will take us a little bit more to the policy landscape, which have changed as well, and it's important to kind of unpack a little bit more.
Your sound's off, Carmen. Your sound is off.
There. Can you hear me
Yes,
now?
Yes, very
Okay,
clear.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Carmen.
Well, thank you for the invitation and joining this group. Hopefully we'll give you a little bit of idea of what's going on in Chile on this really important, imperative, moral purpose that we have to make sure that every child gets an education, because everyone matters. In addition to the information that Romina was sharing, I want to share some very interesting statistics about who are the students in the school system right now. From 2015 to 2024, we had a 792% increase in immigrant enrollment. So immigrant students were 0.9% of the student body in 2015. Now they represent 7.7%. At the same time, we had an 110% increase in students identified as having special education needs in that 10-year period. We increased the number of students who are in the bottom 40 to 50 income percentile. So we have more low-income students attending schools, that increased by to 55%. And there are 4 in 5 public schools. They are schools in which they have been identified as sort of low performing, and in the private sector, that's 3 out of 5. So what I think it's interesting also to note is that this diversification has been much more strong in the public sector, and that the changes in the composition of student body did not pause during COVID-19. So at the same time, schools were receiving more and more immigrant students or students identified with special needs. And at the same time, they were having to negotiate and navigate all the new demands that were brought in by COVID-19. The other thing that's important from a policy perspective is Chile is probably one of the first countries that introduced a very robust accountability system, with the performance-based logic. In fact, we're many times it's indicated as the pioneers of the system. So we have a very strong accountability system through a national testing that's very high stakes. Schools can get closed after repeated performance. We have a SEB law, which requires schools to develop a school improvement plan, and they get special a pupil premium for low-income students, but they are very much accountable for the improvement plans that fund that particular activity. We also have school principals who sign 5-year contracts, and these are performance-based contracts. And if they don't meet the targets, they could be removed. And in the context of this, we have a very strong market model by which schools compete for parent enrollment. So you have what the result is that school funding is based on student enrollment. So if a school doesn't have enough enrollment, they will have very little funding to support students. If a school has a lot of enrollment, they will get more money. And so the competition among schools to attract families and therefore get funding is very strong. So schools face the market accountability, making sure parents choose them, a state accountability, making sure that they produce that kind of test results. And at the same time, we have passed a number of equity laws that really want to guarantee students' right to education. We have a special education law by which students with special needs get special attention in streamlined classes. We have an inclusion law that prohibits the selection of students and the co-payment by parents in subsidized schools, which was part of the reasons for the segregation. We have a new evaluation policy that stresses the importance of using formative assessment and not summative assessment to make decisions about students' trajectory. Recently, we had another law which addresses specific accommodations for students in the autism spectrum. We have another decree that classifies who is and who's not in special needs students, and therefore who can receive additional funding to support their development. We have another law decree that recently passed that promotes the dual language, universal design for learning. So what we find is that when we talk to school principals, they find that the accountability measures, ensuring that you really get high scores on the test and avoid the sanctions or receive the rewards, seem to enter in collision with the equity laws that says, every child matters. So that tension then is what students, principals try to manage, because they think that they cannot do both things. Somehow, if they're excellent, they cannot be inclusive, because if they have too many kids with special needs, they cannot have a very rigorous curriculum. If you have too many immigrant and ethnic minority students, you can't really expect a lot of them because they come from, they having missed schools for many years. When you have very low-income families, then you have problems with the commitment of family, or what they call they have a very deficit model of their low-income family. And the government is really pushing very progressive equity-oriented laws, but at the same time, the school principals have to meet targets, and those targets are related to performance. And the other piece that I think it's important to stress here is that Chile had one of the longest school closures during the pandemic. There were 259 days when schools were closed. And during those days, remote instruction only covered 90%, 10% of the hours that students should have been in class. And so what we see is that schools was facing absenteeism, disparity in technology, exacerbated social economic gaps. And at the same time, when the schools tried to reopen, there was a lot of resistance, very low attendance. And therefore, schools had to really deal with this challenging circumstance of not providing an in-person education and getting a lot of resistance from parents because they were still afraid that something could happen to their kids.
That's very helpful, Carmen. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are lots of questions and comments that colleagues will want to make. Remember, this is a conversation. We invite anybody now who would like to comment, say what came to mind as you heard Romina and Carmen talking about, or if you wish to ask questions of clarification. Put your hand up.
Mel, just on that, please, guys, feel free to shout out or raise your hand, but also use the chat if you'd rather as well, and we can find your questions there.
Who's first?
And I have a few at my sleeve if nobody wants to go first.
I also have this one.
I'll go first. I'm Shukriti. I'm a director in children's and education in Coventry City. Fascinating. There are so many things that you've said that are really chime with us, I think, in terms of what we want to achieve and what I'd be interested to hear. You talked a lot about COVID, and we don't talk about COVID and the impact of COVID on children as much as we did 2-3 years ago. The impact is still there. And we need to recognize that. I guess for me, it's that. How have you seen that journey? I like the fact that you've got all these inclusion laws. We haven't got an inclusion law at all in our school in terms of schools and the expectations. So it is an equity law, and I really think that's wonderful. I'd like to know in terms of what you've seen as the progress made since that time when we came out of COVID, and since these things and getting children back onto the trajectory of learning and being part of the school community and the community in general that they live within, because schools are an important part of the communities that they're in. So have you seen that change, and what's the successes that you've seen? What is it that's making it successful?
I don't know if Romina wants to answer that, or I can go first. But what I mean, appreciate your question, because we did a study looking at resilient schools. How we found a group of schools, very little, that in spite of all this, turmoil of the pandemic, they were able to sustain improvement, and they were able to get kids in school, and they were able to really create inclusive schools. And so, but this was only 15% of the schools. So in the rest of the Chilean schools, that we have about 10,000 schools. This was not the case. So we identified some specific practices, leadership practices, that really help create kind of resiliency. And these were around issues like they use a strong assessment, formative assessment, making sure that every learner had opportunities to advance in the context of very high expectations. We had principals who really took the time to learn the student and create community ties to prevent dropout. And they really try very hard to address the needs of specific children. So it was a very individualized instruction. And because of the immigration, there were many children who didn't really have families. So the school took on the responsibility to become invisible, significant adults. And that kind of work of being sort of in locus parentis, so to speak, it's usually very invisible, but it's fundamental to creating the safety nets needed for learning.
Romina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just from a very personal experience, my sister is the principal of our early childhood center, and she has a huge number of students that were immigrants, and they speak a different language. So I remember, from your question, the colleague that made the question, from your question, it reminds me when I saw her many times, they changed the whole communication strategy with families, because families are so important in early childhood center. The parents are key. They realized that they were using WhatsApp also because the access to internet was very limited. So they started to create materials that could be kind of be shared in WhatsApp, but also making sure that every material was translated to the language of the families. And they did that in a way, so they asked the families to make videos with the kids, kind of to let's do some bread, or let's do some activity in the garden, and the families could share that and send messages to the rest of families. So in a way, create like an online digital community. But that requires a lot of kind of new thinking and creative thinking, and also to disrupt the original, the traditional ways of doing, which I think kind of it leads me to the kind of the more, I think, substantial point for Chile is like how these two kind of logics, how these two purposes coexist. It's possible that a highly marketized education system, with a lot of kind of the value of competition, individualism, it is really possible for a system like that to exist, to promote inclusion. It is possible for that system, really. All these interesting policies, very important policies, to what extent they kind of create some noise, in a way, because we haven't kind of disrupt the foundations of the system. It's just a question that comes to my mind.
I mean, it just strikes me listening to the account. It's clearly people have looked at Chile over the years because it was an advanced case in terms of this kind of emphasis on competition. But I mean, now it seems, despite all the disadvantages that creates, you've now got a real national push, and you've had for some years, around inclusion and equity. And there must, as you're saying, Romina, there must be lessons in that for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Richard, are there other people who want to come in?
Yeah, there are. Let's talk a little bit about teachers, because there's two messages in there, two questions in the chat. There are a lot of good questions and comments already, but Jasmine asked, how do teachers maintain, how is the resilience of the teacher population maintained given these tensions? And I just saw a kind of related question come in from Brian, which is, all teachers deserve the very best support to develop their craft of teaching, especially to achieve the twin goals of excellence and inclusion. And I like that those are put together, excellence and inclusion, because I think the two are kind of synonymous, right? What professional development do teachers have access to on an ongoing basis? So how are teachers supported in terms of being resilient, and how are they being supported in terms of professional development? Maybe we can combine those two questions, and then we'll come on to I see there's hands up in the group as well from Vivian and Catherine. So we'll come back to those.
Yeah, the Chile has a strong policy for professional development. It's free. It's a right. But the extent to which that professional development really travels into the classrooms is questionable, because they tend to be massive online classes. So, it's not very action oriented. Now, there's a policy by which every principal is responsible for developing a professional development plan for teachers. So they have to identify what are the needs of the teachers, and then with the teachers develop a plan. However, because inclusion is not a priority, because inclusion, really the priority is getting good scores on the SIMSE, and people think that having special needs students, inclusion is a barrier to getting those good scores. Good scores come from good students, without, problematizing what even that means. So when the school sets its own internal professional development, they don't put inclusion as a priority. In fact, the studies show that even though the policy that requires formative assessment, teachers say, oh, we can't do it because we don't have special educators can help us individualize instruction, and we don't have time for planning for individual kids. So what's interesting is that the policies are there, but there's something about the implementation that doesn't get traction because it collides with this other accountability. However, in the schools
Karen, when you're talking about these policies like the one you've just mentioned, are you only thinking about the municipal schools, or do they apply to these subsidized private schools as well?
They apply to every school that has public funding, which would be the subsidized, private, and the public, not the fee-paying schools.
And just so I'm not confusing people, I said in my introduction that those schools are something like charter schools in the United States or academies in England. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah. They receive public funding, but therefore they are subjected to some of the public policies.
And the same accountability.
However, not all of them.
And the same accountability.
The same accountability, but with different conditions. For example, the private provider can get additional funding from some foundation to add resources to the school. Just give you my example. I'm the governor of a subsidized school because my university owns one. And as a professor, one of my charges is to work in that school. So when the school needs something, they don't have the money, but the university then provides the resource. So it's also an unequal thing. But what I wanted to point out is that, what we found is that leadership makes a difference. When the leader is committed to inclusion, they set a completely different environment. They set different priorities. They develop trust and partnership with the surrounding community and with parents. And they really say, we need to have very high expectations. And if we provide students with support, they can all meet them. And that's a very strong running through. And then they select teachers who will buy into that.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's Vivian next, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, why don't we go there?
Vivian, over to you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for all you have shared, Romina and Carmen. I find this discussion very interesting because it's similar to my research. My focus is on displaced children in Nigeria and issues around inclusion, marginalization, and all of the things you mentioned about. So that just caught my interest there. And so my question to you is, I would like to know, I mean, you've mentioned wonderful policies that you have, but I want to know what are the challenges that you have, when it comes to practical terms, when you're trying to, I'm focusing on immigrant learners now. So the practical challenges that you find in the process of inclusion and, all that sense of equity and belonging. Thank you.
Thank you.
Romina,
maybe I can just share some thoughts, and thank you for kind of your question. And it's a very complex issue. We have people moving around across the globe. Unfortunately, in Chile, we have seen a lot of racism. As well within the systems and all this kind of the rhetoric about the immigrants being like a threat to resources, kind of travels around the systems. I would say something that is, I mean, currently we are with a new government and issues about legal immigrants and illegal immigrants have been put to the front, which is really impacting schools. I know this not for studies, but for colleagues that are sharing with me that they have been really pushed because at the beginning they were really open to receive students, with a focus on everyone that needs a school need to be in the school. Your legal status issue is secondary. It's not the focus of the school system, but of course these things are interconnected. So that is a huge challenge. As you ask me for challenges, I think that is an important structural challenge on how this legal regulation really ended affecting the same populations and the same group of immigrants, increasing the inequality.
Yeah. And I think Catherine Kelly is next in the queue.
Thank you.
Hi, hello, hola. But apologies that I can't turn my camera on. There's an issue with it at the moment. But I'm very interested in the experience that was described about the displaced or the children, the families that have migrated, and the school leaders that sort of make a difference to how that works. And I'm particularly interested in the language aspect of it. I know there are much broader aspects, and it's about sort of bringing your culture and your culture being appreciated as a displaced person. But something interesting happens around the language of it as well, particularly in an English dominant situation, because English is so dominant that that focus on achieving proficiency and fluency in English. And I'm sort of wondering whether the same thing happens in Chile, because I'm guessing that the majority of the people who are displaced are probably from Haiti.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering whether those language things happen as well, and there sort of develops a need for proficiency in the language of teaching, which is absolutely there. But then the counterbalance to that is a minimizing of the value of maintaining home language, which then subsequently minimizes the value of maintaining home culture. I'm interested.
You also get quite a lot. You get quite a lot of immigrants from other Latin American countries, of course.
Exactly.
Not least Venezuela, and I mean they speak Spanish, don't they?
Yes. Yeah. I'm particularly interested in the language element, which has this effect of minimizing culture and integration, I think.
I think you are right, and particularly thinking about, in the case that I share, early childhood education is all about developing this relationship. You are in a new country.
Exactly.
You don't know the culture. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand the language. So the ability of the school to really make an effort, but put the accent on, this is a place that you belong to, and this is a place that you have a place here. I think it did quite a difference for those families, but the work that the schools had to do, it was really by their own. There was no much support with the question before about professional learning. It was just really, okay, these are our students, how we can respond to them. This is our community, what we can do to deal with this.
I want to bring in another Chilean friend of mine, Cynthia Duck. Cynthia, if you don't mind, I want to put you on the spot. Cynthia works in another university in Santiago and works a lot doing action research projects with schools, particularly in disadvantaged communities. I'm just wondering, Cynthia, as you've heard this conversation, what have you been thinking?
Hi, Mel and everybody. And thanks for the invitation. A very, very interesting conversation. My English is not fluent, so that's why I haven't interviewed before. But I have Carmen, my colleague, that Carmen, you can translate me a little.
Yeah.
Okay. First, I would like to say that Carmen did a wonderful description and Romina of our situation in Chile. But now we are in a big tension. And somebody asked about the challenge that we have. Y yo pienso que en la realidad actual y con los vaivenes, ¿no?, de políticos y de cambios de gobierno, una de los mayores dificultades y también desafíos que tenemos es realmente en Chile lograr un proyecto educativo país consensuado, políticas de Estado de largo plazo, porque lo que nos ocurre, y en muchos países vivimos la misma situación, es que dependiendo del gobierno de turno, los avances, sobre todo en materia de inclusión, equidad, tienden a verse obstaculizados dependiendo de la ideología del gobierno de turno. Y esa es la situación en que hoy día estamos.
Cynthia, I need to try. I'm going to have to summarize because
Yes,
I
just
will
a
say a lot.
summarize. Yes.
But
Summarize,
I
yeah.
think that the key point that she's making is that in Chile we lack a state policy for educational equity and quality because we change governments every 4 years, and over the last 12 years, it's been a right wing, then a left wing, then a right wing, and then a left wing. So during the left wing periods, we have a lot of progressive policies. Then comes a right wing period, and they try to move things back. And so there is a discussion, for example, today about whether the children of illegal immigrants have the right to get education and health. Of course, you know, Chile has all these international treaties, etc. But that's a problematic because, and then there's a new requirement, law, saying that schools are obliged to sort of give information about illegal immigrants to the authorities so they can be expelled. So teachers are put in this position of where they have to turn in kids. So their commitment and their moral values are being totally transgressed. And so that's a discussion right now. And a lot of people are raising questions, but since the right wing has the majority in Congress, it might happen.
Yeah. I think what listening to the conversation, it confirms in a sense that it's worth looking at any case. But Chile is such a particularly interesting case because of these sways of government. And yet, despite all of that, you know, there's been all this emphasis on competition and choice and so on. There still is a big thrust coming through the policies for notions of inclusion and equity. So there are clearly lessons for the rest of us to learn, I think, from Chile. Does anybody want to take the conversation in a different direction, Richard?
But let me just finish with one idea, Mel, which is very interesting. In the study that we did, the public schools that have lost a lot of enrollment, you know, they're at 36%, welcome the immigrant students because they save them. I mean, if they didn't have immigrant students, they would have a lot less than 30%.
So it means, doesn't it, that your government schools, what I call municipal schools, they have the concentration of poor children and immigrant children.
Exactly.
So effectively, you've got a structurally very segregated system, haven't you?
Exactly. And also the additional special needs student as well. So you have the most complex, you know, settings. With in many times with no much support from the system to really deal with extremely complex situations.
Yeah, Richard.
At this point, I would like to emphasize that in Chile, maybe is one of the countries of Latin American countries that have more resources in the schools. We have maybe more than developed country.
No, that's a very good point, Cynthia.
Yes,
so it's a very, by comparison,
important.
in Latin America, it's a well-resourced system, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we just move on to other people? Thank you, Richard.
Yes.
Yes, I have a quick question that I'm trying to incorporate a few people's comments and questions in one go because of the time. quite a few people have mentioned either out loud or in the chat. I know Alphonse has mentioned it, that there's this idea that about competition and inclusion not being a priority because of the competition and the testing, and this is not something that's specific to Chile. Of course, we had the same conversation with our Australian friends last time.
Yes.
And there's this tension here, but with that in mind, how might inclusion be framed as something, as an opportunity to improve education for all students, rather than just being something that is actually at the moment seen as something that is kind of opposed to this focus on excellence and standardization? How might we shift the view of inclusion to being about excellent education for all students and away from this kind of focus on where it is now? And related to that, we were talking about the kind of the shift between the left and the right political parties, and it's kind of unavoidable to not talk about politics in these conversations. How can inclusive education be presented to both of these groups, each side of the political spectrum, as well as an opportunity?
And within the international debate in many countries, that kind of division, part of us are concerned with inclusion and equity, other people are concerned with equity, is a structural problem. That's a barrier to progress, really. And jumping ahead in advertising, the meeting after next, we'll talk to Portugal. And Portugal is a remarkable example of how it's used inclusion and equity as a pathway to excellence. And if you look at the testing records from OECD, Portugal has progressed over the last 10, 15 years because of its emphasis on inclusion and equity. So I think in countries like Chile, what we have to do is to somehow convince policymakers that this is not a separate strategy, it is the strategy, on the assumption, somewhat romantic perhaps, but with nothing wrong with a bit of romance here and there, on the assumption that if we can make progress in relation to addressing diversity, that will create a better education system for all children. But when you have a structural system which is so rigid as we have in Chile, municipal, the so-called academies, I call them, the private schools, this structural division, and we heard of the same thing in Australia, of course, the same kind of, it's a similar kind of structural system, that in itself creates all sorts of barriers. Are there any other themes or questions? I'm conscious of time, Richard.
Yeah, can I add to your comment?
Ramon.
I think that one of the key ideologies is this idea of merit. So the right wing always thinks that merit is what really matters, and they see merit as almost something that you're born with. So they decide that some students have merit and other students don't have merit. So this whole idea of what merit means and who then therefore deserves sort of greater attention, etc., is very problematic. And so that's one of the beliefs about that we need to change. So I would argue that many of the problems are more cultural than structural, in the sense of people having a very deficit perspective. And they also have this idea that merit is an individual attribute without recognizing that merit is totally socially constructed.
It's an interesting word, merit, isn't it? That the people are born with merit. I've not heard of it before. That's rather interesting. Richard.
I'm going to go straight to a question from, I know, Anton, you have your hand up. Did you want to jump in as well and make a comment or a question?
Well, we've got two questions yet, which I was hoping we might be able to kind of fit in. Are schools inspected by an independent regulatory body? And if so, what is the focus and how often? And that connects to the dilemmas you've been talking about, with regard. And the second question from Kristen is, I've seen a few different stats on the percentage of students identified with disabilities in Chile. What is the current percentage of students identified? Have those numbers been increasing since COVID? And is Chile doing work around disproportionate identification, considering your rise in immigrant populations and multilingual students? So those are two distinct questions that I was hoping we'd be able to answer.
Sounds like a call for another meeting, I think, all of that. We've got about 2 minutes left. That's what I've got yourself.
I think, one point that maybe, there are an increase in the students, with the disabilities, I think, across the globe is like a huge spike in percentages, and even something that sometimes you don't understand how the system can have so many students under these categories, and there is a mix of factors, of course, but I think that also there is also sometimes they are masked with poverty, and in the case of Chile, so sometimes you have kind of different kind of layers playing out together. I mean, in addition to what Carmen was saying about the cultural aspect, which plays a huge role, I think there is also about inclusion is the issue. Is going to be the issue for any education system in the present and the future. So in a way, it will hit the systems for good or bad. It will hit them for the segregation, the issues around democracy, how we live together. So it's not just about how much you know about things. That is kind of the minimal, the educational kind of formal piece is just one piece. But being a citizen of the world and understand to be part of that complex world, I think is going to just be increased, being the mission of schools. And in Chile, there is quite a lot of work to do around. We still have a lot of accountability, and raising standards and excellence against inclusion. And I think the structural system, the policies that we have need to be disrupted much more to really make that connection.
But there are a couple of things I want to add. One is
very quick,
to your
Carmen.
question.
We're running out of time.
To your question, Anton, there is an inspection system, but it only works for underperforming schools. So it doesn't, it's not general, and it's not at random, and it's only underperforming schools, and they now are trying to inspect specific areas. And then to the second point, I think that there is because we have a strong market and choice, all the policies that you can do for equity and inclusion, at the end of the day, are the parents who decide to maintain schools segregated. So schools have a bad reputation, parents don't choose there. So the question is how much policy can do when you have parents who want to have an advantage and put their kids in the good school, and they identify stigmatized schools, etc. So the parent component of this, I think it's very important, and sometimes policy doesn't really pay attention to that component.
Okay, we're going to have to draw the conversation sadly to an end. I think it's obviously a very rich example, and it's illustrated the potential of these conversations. And I suspect most, if not all of us, will go away thinking about our own experiences and our own system wherever we are in the world. And this rather extreme, vivid example has really kind of, I think, brought those issues into focus, and we'll pick them up in later meetings. So particular thanks to Carmen, Romina, and Cynthia, who didn't know she was going to be asked to come and join the conversation. Richard, explain briefly how we're going to deal with the record of this meeting.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks again, everyone, and particularly those who gave a brief talk or asked questions. I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I've put a link in the chat to a Google Doc that everyone is welcome to add to and join a kind of, there's no formal structure to it. If you scroll down, you'll get to the Chile section. So the first section you'll see is Australia. That was our first conversation. If you want to add anything in about Chile, any academic papers, any websites, any questions, any comments, it's kind of it's a place just to dump information and knowledge and hopefully start some more spin-off conversations out of this. So it's open access. So please also share with your colleagues if you'd like to. After this, we're going to share a summary of the recording. Are we going to share the full recording, Anton, or
yes?
I can't remember. Okay, yeah, the full recording of the meeting will be shared. We'll also work on a summary, just a brief 1 or 2 pager, just to talk about what the questions that were raised, the comments that were raised, that kind of thing, and a rather wonderful AI audio summary we hope to produce. We made one for the Australia session that actually worked out quite well, so we'll try and do another one for this, which you'll be sent if you signed up to the I'm into uncharted territory here, Anton. I'm going to hand over to you. If you signed up to the ELM the website, you should be sent this by email, right?
Well, the link will be there. What we've already created for Australia is a set of resources, and the resources pattern is full video, a written synopsis, and then this wonderful audio AI, which becomes a conversation that AI has created between two people that draws on the key points that have come out from the full transcription of the video. So we'll do the same for this conversation. And just to remind everybody that at the end of the 4 conversations, at the end of the year, the 3 of us will put all of this together and we'll create a think piece that will be published and openly available by the Staff College.
And the next event, Anton?
The next event is the Netherlands, according to my diary.
That's right, which is going to be a very different case, I assure you, to the 2 that we've seen already. You know, it's very interesting, but in a very different way. What date is that, Anton?
I don't have that to hand, sorry. It's in about 6 weeks or so.
I'll find it now. Just while I do, there's a question from Jasmine. How do people continue to sign up for the conversations?
Oh, go to the Staff College website. So if you put the Staff College into Google, it will take you to there. And on the homepage, there's a scrolling roll at the top, and you'll get to Every Learner Matters. Click on that, you'll be able to sign up, and also that will take you to all the materials that we're accumulating. Okay.
I've got 15th of September for the Netherlands.
16th of September.
15th of September.
The Netherlands. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, and keep in touch. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Nancy, everybody who came.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.